Hi guys, good morning. Yesterday we heard that it was Zigzag's birthday, as he is saying. We're not 100% sure it is, but he's like asking for all this extra stuff. And Stanley was on hole number 45. And basically he was saying that he's getting pretty good at it. It's still a little awkward with Zero digging his holes, but he's kind of starting to have a good rhythm and stuff. Okay. Zero took his turn before the lunch break. Stanley climbed out of his hole and Zero climbed down into it. "Hey, caveman," said Zigzag, "you should get a whip. Then if your slave doesn't dig fast enough, you could crack it across his back." "He's not my slave," said Stanley. "We have a deal, that's all." "A good deal for you," said Zigzag. "It was Zero's idea, not mine." "Don't you know, Zig?" said X-Ray, coming over. "Caveman's doing Zero a big favor. Zero likes to dig holes." "He sure is a nice guy to let Zero dig his holes for him," said Squid. "Well, what about me?" asked Armpit. "I like to dig holes too. Can I dig for you, Caveman, after Zero's finished?" The other boys laughed. "No, I want to," said Zigzag. "It's my birthday." Stanley tried to keep his best to ignore him. Zigzag kept at it. "Come on, Caveman, be a pal. Let me dig your hole." Stanley smiled as if it were all a big joke. When Mr. Pendanski arrived with water and lunch, Zigzag offered Stanley his place in line. "Since you're so much better than me." Stanley remained where he was. "I didn't say I was bet." "You're insulting him, Zig," said X-Ray. "Why should Caveman take your place when he deserves to be at the very front? He's better than all of us, aren't you, Caveman?" "No," said Stanley. "Sure you are," said X-Ray. "Now come up to the front of the line where you belong." God, they're being so awful. "That's okay," said Stanley. "No, it's not okay," said X-Ray. "Get up here." Stanley hesitated, then moved to the front of the line. "Well, this is a first," Mr. Pendanski said, coming around the side of the truck. He filled Stanley's canteen and handed him a sack of lunch. Stanley was glad to get away. He sat down between his hole and Zero's. He was glad he'd be digging his own hole for the rest of the day. Maybe the other boys would just leave him alone. Maybe he shouldn't let Zero dig his hole for him anymore. But he did need to save his energy to be a good teacher. He bit into his sandwich, which contained some kind of meat and cheese mixture that came in a can. Just about everything at Camp Green Lake came in a can. The supply truck only came once a month. He glanced up to see Zigzag and Squid walking toward him. "I'll give you my cookie if you let me dig your hole," said Zigzag. Squid laughed. "Here, take my cookie," said Zigzag, holding it out. "No thanks," said Stanley. "Come on, take my cookie," said Zigzag, sticking it in his face. "Leave me alone," said Stanley. "Please eat the cookie," said Zigzag, holding it under Stanley's nose. Squid laughed. Stanley pushed it away. Zigzag pushed him back. "Don't push me." "I didn't." Stanley got to his feet. He looked around. Mr. Pendanski was filling Zero's canteen. Zigzag pushed him again. "I said, don't push me." Stanley took a step backwards, carefully avoiding Zero's hole. Zigzag kept after him. He shoved Stanley and said, "Quit pushing." "Lay off," said Armpit, as he, Magnet, and X-Ray joined them. "Why should he?" snapped X-Ray. "Caveman's bigger. He can take care of himself." "I don't want any trouble," Stanley said. Zigzag pushed him hard. "Eat my cookie," he said. Stanley was glad to see Mr. Pendanski coming up to them, along with Zero. "Hi, Mom," said Armpit. "We're just fooling around." "I saw what was going on," Mr. Pendanski said. He turned to Stanley. "Go ahead, Stanley," he said. "Hit him back. You're bigger." Stanley stared at Mr. Pendanski in astonishment. "Teach the bully a lesson," said Mr. Pendanski. Zigzag hit Stanley on the shoulder with his open hand. "Teach me a lesson," he challenged. Stanley made a feeble attempt to punch Zigzag and then felt the flurry of fists against his head and neck. Zigzag had the hold of his collar with one hand and was hitting him with the other. The collar ripped and Stanley fell backwards onto the dirt. "That's enough," Mr. Pendanski yelled. It wasn't enough for Zigzag. He jumped on top of Stanley. "Stop!" shouted Mr. Pendanski. The side of Stanley's face was pressed against the dirt. He tried to protect himself, but Zigzag's fist slammed off his arms and pounded his head into the ground. All he could do was wait for it to be over. Then, suddenly, Zigzag was off of him. Stanley managed to look up, and he saw that Zero had his arm around Zigzag's long neck. Zigzag made a gagging sound as he desperately tried to pry Zero's arm off of him. "You're gonna kill him!" shouted Mr. Pendanski. Zero kept squeezing. "Good job, Zero." Armpit charged into them, freeing Zigzag from Zero's chokehold. The three boys fell into the ground in different directions. Mr. Pendanski fired his pistol in the air. The other camp counselors came running from the office. The tents are out on the lake. They had their guns drawn, but holstered when they saw the trouble was over. The warden walked over from her cabin. "There was a riot," Mr. Pendanski said. "Zero almost strangled Ricky." The warden looked at Zigzag, who was still stretching and massaging his neck. Then she turned her attention to Stanley, who was obviously in the worst condition. "What happened?" Nothing. It wasn't a riot. Ziggy was beating up the caveman, said Armpit. Then Zero started choking Zigzag, and I had to pull Zero off Zigzag. It was all over before Mom fired his gun. They just got a little hot, that's all, said X-Ray. You know how it is. In the sun all day, people get hot, right? But everything's cool now. I see, the warden said. She turned to Zigzag. What's the matter? Didn't you get a puppy for your birthday? Zig's a little hot, said X-Ray. You know, out in the sun all day. You know, blood starts to boil. Is that what happened, Zigzag? Asked the warden. Yes, said Zigzag. Like X-Ray said, working so hard in the hot sun while Caveman just sits around doing nothing, my blood boiled. Excuse me, said the warden. Caveman digs his holes just like everyone else. Zigzag shrugged. Sometimes. Excuse me? Zero's been digging a part of Caveman's hole every day, said Squid. The warden looked from Squid to Stanley to Zero. I'm teaching him to read and write, said Stanley. It's a sort of a trade. The hole gets dug, so what does it matter who digs it? Excuse me, said the warden. Isn't it more important for him to learn to read, Stanley asked. Doesn't that build character more than just digging holes? That's his character, said the warden. What about your character? Stanley raised and lowered his shoulder. The warden looked at Zero. Well, Zero, what have you learned so far? Zero said nothing. Have you just been digging Caveman's hole for nothing? The warden asked him. He likes to dig holes, said Mr. Pendanski. Tell me what you learned yesterday, said the warden. Surely you can remember that. Zero laughed. Zero said nothing. Mr. Pendanski laughed. He picked up a shovel and said, You might as well try to teach the shovel to read. It's got more brains than Zero. The at sound, said Zero. The at sound, repeated the warden. Well, then tell me, what does C-A-T spell? Zero glanced around uneasily. Stanley knew he knew the answer. Zero just didn't like answering questions. Cat, Zero said. Mr. Pendanski clapped his hand. Bravo, bravo, the boy's a genius. F-A-T, asked the warden. Zero thought a moment. Stanley hadn't taught him the F sound yet. F, Zero whispered, F, fat. How about H-A-T? Asked the warden. Stanley hadn't taught him the H sound yet. Zero concentrated hard, then said, Chat? All the counselors laughed. Oh my God, these people are horrible. He's a genius, all right, said Mr. Pendanski. He's so stupid, he doesn't even know that he's stupid. Zero didn't know why Mr. Pendanski seemed to have it in for Zero. If Mr. Pendanski only thought about it, he'd realize it was very logical for Zero to think the letter H made the ch sound. Okay, from now on, I don't want anyone digging any more else's holes, said the warden. No more reading lessons. I'm not digging another hole, said Zero. Good, said the warden. She turned to Stanley. You know why you're digging holes. Because it's good for you. It teaches you a lesson. If Zero digs your hole, then you're not learning your lesson, are you? I guess not. Stanley mumbled, although he knew they weren't just digging to learn a lesson. He knew she was looking for something, something that belonged to Kiss and Kate Barlow. Why can't I just dig my own hole but still teach Zero to read, he said. What's wrong with that? I'll tell you what's wrong with that, the warden said. It leads to trouble. Zero almost killed Zigzag. It caused him distress, said Mr. Pendanski. I know you mean well, but let's face it. Zero's too stupid to learn to read. That's what makes his blood boil, not the hot sun. I'm not digging another hole, said Zero. Mr. Pendanski handed the shovel. Here, take it, Zero. It's all you'll ever be good at. Zero took the shovel. Then he swung it like a baseball bat. The middle blade smashed against Mr. Pendanski's face. His knees crumpled beneath him. He was unconscious before he hit the ground. The counselors drew their guns. Zero held the shovel in front of him as if he were going to try to bat away the bullets. I hate digging holes, he said. Then he slowly backed away. Don't shoot him, said the warden. He can't go anywhere. The last thing we need is an investigation. Zero kept backing up out past the cluster of holes the boys had been digging, then further out in the lake. He's going to have to come back for water, the warden said. Stanley noticed Zero's canteen lying on the ground near his hole. A couple of the counselors helped Mr. Pendanski to his feet and into the truck. Stanley looked out toward Zero, but he had disappeared into the haze. The warden ordered the counselors to take turns guarding the shower room and the rec room all day and all night. They were not to let Zero drink any water. When he returned, he was to be brought directly to her. She examined her fingernails and said, It's almost time for me to paint my nails again. Before she left, she told the 6 remaining members of Group D that she still expected 7 holes. Okay, that part of the story is so dramatic, but it's so good because finally Zero gets to have like some revenge on these awful people who have been so mean to him this whole time. I want you to comment. Make sure you comment, guys. I've noticed you haven't been commenting as much. Make sure you comment on what you think might happen to Zero. Do you think he's going to survive? Will he come back for water? What do you think will happen next? I will see you soon for a morning meeting, and I promise I will record it. Bye, guys.